This gladiator brutally fought his way out of prison in southern Italy. He led an army of escaped prisoners, armed with nothing but a stolen kitchen knife. Within 2 years, he had raised an army of 70,000 people, marched the entire length of the Italian peninsula, and defeated the most powerful military force on earth, not once, not twice, but over and over again. He had no country, no resources, no political power, and single-handedly sent the Roman Senate into a full-blown spiral. He was supposed to be property. He was supposed to be used for entertainment, and he nearly brought the entire thing down. This is the story of Spartacus, the Third Servile War, the most savage gladiator who dared to defy the entire Roman Republic. And today, we're walking through his entire journey, from prison cell to the coast of the sea to the northern Alps, through every battle, and along the way, we will see why history will be forced to reckon with him time and time again. So, sit back, relax, and welcome to History Camp. What's up, dude? Welcome back to History Camp. My name is Mark Gagnon, and thank you for joining me in my tent, where every single week we explore the most interesting, fascinating, controversial stories from around the world, from all time through all history forever. Yes, that is what I do here every single week, as I try to understand everything that has ever happened. Truly, I'm trying to figure out everything that's been going on, and every single day new history gets made, so we have a lot of catching up to do, no time to waste. But before we do, a couple camp announcements. First, I want to thank you for clicking on this video. Every time you support, comment, like, subscribe, all that stuff, you help keep the lights on in the tent, and you help keep the fire burning here at the campsite. Also, I want to invite you, if you are interested and so inclined, to join our secret society. Yeah, this is a special invite for you and you alone. Tell no one about this. It's called patreon.com/campgagnon. That is the inner sanctum. That is where we gather. And allegedly, I can't confirm or deny this, if you go to that link, you can get new episodes every single month. Episodes that don't go out to the public. You can get every single episode of this podcast completely ad-free. You can get live Zooms where all the campers hang out and we chop it up and we talk about the ongoings of the world and our own personal lives. And you can talk to my pal Christos YAPPIN just for the small price of a cup of coffee every single month. Yes, that is what you get at patreon.com/campgagnon. Speaking of Christos, how are you?
What's going on?
Christos, I'm sorry, we don't have a ton of time because today we're talking about perhaps the most interesting and sophisticated society ever to be created on the planet Earth. And that's the Roman Empire. Not the Greeks. The Romans.
You know that bothers me.
And I'm saying it just to drive a wedge, you know? No, I'm just kind of goofing around here. We are talking about our pal Spartacus. And I'm sure you've heard the name, right? You've probably seen some movies about him. But do you actually know the real Spartacus? Well, if you don't, you're in the right place. Where does the story begin with old Spartacus? Well, we're going back to the 1st century BC. You see, in the 1st century, the Roman Republic was one of the most brutal social arrangements in human history. It had one of the craziest hierarchies, and unfortunately, not one that is too uncommon. It ran on slavery. Not slavery as like a distant institution or like a thing people did on the side. Slavery was integral to the entire economy. Scholars estimate as many as 1.5 million enslaved people toiled on the Italian peninsula alone. And this is, again, in a population of only like 5 million at the time. That's nearly 1 in 3 people. Slaves worked the great agricultural estates, the latifundia, that the Roman aristocracy had amassed through centuries of conquest and empire building. They built the roads. They served in the houses of the wealthy. They worked the mines where, conditions were so lethal that a sentence to the mines was basically a death sentence. And some of them, the unlucky ones who happened to be intimidating, physically imposing, well, they were sent to gladiatorial schools. They are known as the ludi, and they were to be trained to be killed or to kill for mass entertainment. Now, gladiators occupy a strange and specific place in Roman society. They were largely slaves, and they were celebrities at the same time. The crowds adored them. Their names were scratched into walls across the empire, the way like a modern city might put up graffiti of like a famous football or basketball player. Some even accumulated enough fame that they were actually granted their freedom. But to be a gladiator was to live inside a compound that was partially barracks, partially a prison. And they were trained and fed and housed like a prized horse, like very expensive livestock. And instead of racing, they were taught how to swing a sword. They were kept alive because they were an investment. The average gladiatorial career was measured in years, not decades. And it was not a great recipe for a long life. And the crowd that cheered for you on a Tuesday could be just straight up voting for your death on a Friday. It was a fickle industry to be in. And that is the world that our story starts. Now, the Spartacus guy, who was that? And how did he end up on the inside of this treacherous economy? Well, there's actually no contemporary accounts of Spartacus whatsoever. Yeah. There's nothing written about him from anybody who was alive at the same time. Every source we have, from Plutarch to Florus and the fragments of the of Sallust and Livy, they were written at least a century after the events had actually taken place themselves by Roman and Greeks who were working from earlier sources, which are now lost to time. They were writing about a man whose own perspective was never preserved from firsthand accounts and never told from him or, his own perspective. There's no letters or an autobiography or nothing. Plutarch describes Spartacus as a man of intelligence and of culture and capability that a Roman audience would not have expected from, the run-of-the-mill gladiator slave. Now, whether that reflects Spartacus' own background or just simply Plutarch's framing, we can't really know. But what we can say is that he was the kind of guy that stood out, and he was someone worth remembering. And all the sources that we have agree on that much. Now, Spartacus was Thracian, from a region that's roughly in modern-day Bulgaria or in northern Greece.
Thraki.
Oh, Thrakia. I like that. Now, Rome considered this to be the edge of civilization, as the Romans typically do. If you're not, properly Roman, you're uncivilized. And so these people were just right on the precipice. Now, Spartacus had at some point served as a soldier, possibly in the Roman auxiliary forces. He may have deserted or had been captured. Either way, he did something to warrant him becoming enslaved. And at some point, he was sold to a gladiatorial school in Capua, in the Campanian region of northern Italy, which is like roughly 25 miles north of modern-day Naples. And there he trained as a fighter, as a gladiator, and above all, as an entertainer. He was, by all surviving records, surprisingly and exceptionally good at being a gladiator. It was a republic in the middle of a deep structural crisis. 2 generations of brutal warfare. You have the social war, the civil war between Sulla and Marius, and the ongoing campaigns in Spain and the East had hollowed out the Roman spirit and quite literally the Roman countryside. I mean, small farmers were pushed off their lands, and this concentrated an enormous amount of wealth and power at the hands of a very small bureaucratic, kind of aristocratic class. I mean, the senators of this ancient Roman period were very rich, and the slaves were everywhere, and the middle class was completely disappearing. And the army had become a tool of really just like individual powerful men. And a lot of these very rich nobles kind of had their own militias, and it was in the control of these men rather than the state. The Republic's final decades had begun, and everyone could feel the ground was starting to shift. It was a world ripe for someone to start a massive fire. And in 73 BC, Spartacus decided he wasn't going to be risking his life for Rome's entertainment anymore. He was going to be that spark. Now, according to our sources, a group of roughly 200 gladiators had been planning this mass escape from the gladiator school/prison. But someone, and we don't know who, betrayed that plot. The guards moved in before the gladiators were ready, and Spartacus, faced with the sudden collapse of a carefully planned operation, made an immediate decision to improvise. He and roughly 70 other gladiators broke for the kitchen. They grabbed whatever was in there, whatever they could just put in their hand. I mean, cleavers, carving knives, pots, pans, anything they could find in the kitchen, and they fought their way out of one of the most heavily supervised facilities in the Roman world, armed with just cooking equipment, against professional guards and soldiers. By sheer ferocity, they were able to manage an escape, and then, led by Spartacus, they intercepted a wagon on the road outside the school. It was carrying gladiatorial weapons and armor to other ludis. Now, they gained a wagon and some extra gladiator supplies, and they headed for the slopes of Mount Vesuvius. It was dormant in 73 BC. Vesuvius, as we know, this is the massive volcano that ultimately destroyed and covered all of Pompeii and much of Naples. Now, at the time, it was dormant and it was heavily forested and served as a natural fortress for these rogue, rebellious gladiators. And it kind of raised above the farmland of the nearby town. Now, high ground, dense cover, and a view over the richest agricultural estates in Italy where they could see for miles. It was a perfect defensive position for this little rebel militia. And it was about to become the recruitment camp for these rebels. Word spread all throughout the countryside, not just of the escape, but what was growing as a result. And the Roman response to these rebels at this stage was, just a massive blunder. Comically dismissive. They were basically like, all right, a group of runaway gladiators are hiding in the woods. And the Senate dispatched a local militia force with about 3,000 men under a commander named Gaius Claudius Glaber, not a seasoned general, not a full legion, but basically just like the local police is how you could think of it. Now, this commander Glaber marched his men up to the foot of Vesuvius, blockaded the one known path to the summit, and basically just waited. And his logic was straightforward. He's like, okay, these are a bunch of slaves. They're trapped, and they're going to run out of food in this forest, and they're going to come down, and this is the only way down. So we're just going to sit here and then arrest/kill all of them when they get here. So at this point, Rome isn't even treating this as a military problem. This is just like a little prison break, little pest issue, Spartacus looked at the situation from above, and he did what a good trained soldier does. He found an angle that this commander wasn't covering. He had his men strip the wild grapevines growing in abundance across the slopes of Vesuvius and wove them into ropes. Then, under the cover of night, they rappelled down the cliff face on the opposite side of the volcano, the side that no one was actually watching. And they crept around the Roman camp and attacked them from behind. Now, in the chaos of this night attack from an entirely unexpected direction, they overran the entire camp. Most of the forces were killed or fled, and the gladiators basically now seized their weapons and their armor and all their supplies. And in just one night, with just 70 men, Spartacus had taken his first Roman military camp. And the issue with these types of slave rebellions is that all the other slaves start to see this and they go, if they could do it, maybe we could do it. And as a result, now the Roman Empire has an issue. Runaway field workers, shepherds, herdsmen from the vast, Campanian estates, even people who were technically free but lived lives just basically in destitute poverty, they all began flocking to the mountain. And within weeks, the camp on Vesuvius had grown from, 70 escaped slave gladiators to thousands. And here's something the sources will skip over, but I think deserves a little bit of attention. Think about what that looked like. This is not a Roman army. They didn't have a uniform or, all the same equipment or money. They didn't even have a shared language. You had people from Germans to Celts to, Thracians to Gauls, like everyone from all these different regions, all the different cultures communicating across languages and dialects, all for this shared cause of just like, F these rich people. Some had been gladiators, professional fighters, and they were very disciplined. Some had just been like agricultural slaves who had spent years just working the field and never even held a weapon in their lives. Some were women who had followed their husbands or even came on their own terms. And according to the historian Barry Strauss, the camp almost certainly included some children as well. There were people who had arrived carrying nothing but the clothes that they were wearing, and people who had managed to bring iron tools from the fields. And what they all had in common was this thing: it's time for a change. So the Roman Senate gets wind of this, and they send another praetor named Publius Varinius. This was a much more serious expedition with several thousand men, but they too were defeated. Verinius himself barely even escaped. The rebels captured his equipment, his horses, everything. They even took his fasces. This is the bundle of rods and axes that basically act as like a badge that symbolizes like official Roman authority. And this symbol of Roman power, Roman authority was now in the hands of this like ragtag group of like rebels that are now camped out on a mountain. And the message is very clear. They're like, hey, we're not running. We are fighting and we are going to die for this. Because either we're going to die in that stadium for nothing, or we can gamble here, die on a hill, or get free. And they're like, you put us with no choice. We're going to fight to be free. Now, by the winter of 73, 72, the rebel force had grown to be an estimated 70,000 people. Though the ancient sources tend to inflate their own numbers, and modern scholars will treat these figures with a lot of caution and nuance. But what's clear here is that this is no longer like a band of fugitives that need the police to go, teach them a lesson. This is an army. And they spent that winter manufacturing weapons and training recruits and expanding their raids across the entire region. And the Senate of Rome was now finally forced to really pay attention. So by the spring of 72 BC, the Senate was noticeably worried. The situation had gotten more than just a little bit out of hand, and they had to do something. So the Senate dispatched both consuls for the year. The two guys are Lucius Gellius Publicola and Gnaeus Cornelius Lentulus Claudianus.
Great job.
I did pretty good with that.
That's pretty good.
So these two consuls, each of them commanding full legions of men. This is like officially the Roman A team. All right. They got like the Jordan of their time to go out there, take this little ragtag army out and put an end to this. They were done being embarrassed by these, rebel slaves. But old Spartacus was on the move. And the thing is, at this point, the historical sources can't agree where he was going or why he was going there. Plutarch writes that Spartacus's goal was to lead his followers north, to cross the Alps and then disperse them back into freedom, many of them back to their homelands from wherever they were conquered from. Now, under this reading, Spartacus wasn't necessarily a revolutionary in the way that we think about it. He was running an extraction operation. He was like, let's just get the people out of here and get them to safety and go be free. And that was how some people interpret this, that he was just trying to, get him and his squad just to be free. But Appian and Florus write something very different. They say Spartacus intended to march on Rome itself, that he had his eyes on the capital, and that the terror this possibly generated in the city was very real and widespread, and people were afraid of a proper revolution. And both accounts may contain some of the truth. What we can say for sure here is that the rebel army was not a single coherent entity. Like any military, people are joining for different reasons, right? It's a coalition of disparate people with different backgrounds and motivations held together by this shared grievance and the momentum of, a couple unexpected victories. But, many of them divided on every other issue in their life. And that part of the story is still not clear. So looking at the battle of 72 BC, you have this rebel army, and they all have their own little motivations, and you have the Roman consuls coming in to crush them. Now, here's what happens, all right? Crixus, this is a guy who's operating a contingent of the rebel force, and he's got roughly like 30,000 men, and they engage with the Roman consul Gellius near Mount Garganus in Apulia. And this is what happens. Crixus was killed. It was a serious blow to this entire movement and a very real reminder that Rome, when it actually committed, was a legitimate, formidable enemy. But then Spartacus engaged the other two armies directly and defeated both of them. The sources record that he held funeral games in honor of Crixus afterward, using Roman prisoners as the fighters, which is a deliberate, pointed inversion of the spectacles that Rome had staged with these enslaved men. Now, whether every detail of that account is exact, the symbolic element of the writing is very clear, that this was a message written in a way that Rome would understand it. Like, hey, we are not your toys. We are not just going to die for your entertainment. As a matter of fact, tonight, you're going to die for our entertainment. And now this is where we know that the rebel army pressed north, all the way to the Po Valley, all the way to the foot of the Alps toward a passage of freedom. A military force of roughly 10,000 Romans under the governor of Cisalpine Gaul tried to stop them. and they were just swept aside. And then Spartacus's men stopped. They were there. The mountains were right in front of them. And on the other side of those mountains lay Gaul and Germany and home for many of them, or at least the direction of home, or at the very least freedom. And the army that had marched the length of Italy, that had beaten all the Roman forces that they encountered, just stopped at the foot of the Alps and turned around. Hey guys, we're going to take a break really quick because I want to talk to you about GLD. This is an awesome new company that we're working with that I'm actually wearing right now. Now, here's the thing. You probably have the basics, right? You always have like the shoes, your go-to shoes you always wear. You always got the jeans that you always wear. You got that one black tee that makes your biceps pop. You know, we all got like the one fit that we feel nice in, but most dudes are missing the final piece. I'm talking about the Jesus piece. I'm talking about the jewelry that brings the whole fit together. Yes, and that is where GLD comes from. I actually got this crucifix right here. And honestly, even just getting it, you know, sometimes like when you work with some companies, you're like, all right, I really hope the product is good. This one is. I wear it all the time. This is actually like the new crucifix. I lost my last one at a bathhouse. Literally at a sauna, I lost my crucifix, which is maybe God's way of telling me something. But I got a new one from GLD, and I've been rocking it nonstop. My wife likes it, and it's got like a nice weight to it. The details actually look better in person. The clasp is like super solid. It doesn't feel like something you bought like in Times Square from a random dude. It doesn't feel like something you ordered from, you know, a sketchy website on Temu. Like this is the real simple, clean crucifix, and they've got a bunch of stuff. It's not just religious. Like I throw it on and it just makes me feel like I have like an actual outfit. It makes me feel good. And they got everything: chains, pendants, bracelets, watches, whether you want something subtle or something that's like, yo, I just signed a deal. You know what I mean? If you want like the record deal chain, they got that too. They have official collabs with, I mean, basically everyone: NFL, NBA, MLB, NCAA, NHL, DC Comics, MLS. So you can actually rep your team without looking like you bought merch from like a random dude outside the stadium. Plus, they have pieces at every price point. They can get you the entry-level 18K gold-plated piece all the way up to the solid gold and natural diamond piece. And they even do fully custom pieces. So if you want a one-of-one pendant, GLD can actually just do that for you. And every single piece is guaranteed for life. Now, if I haven't convinced you yet, let me sweeten the deal a little bit, all right? For a limited time, the listeners of this program, Camp Gagnon, Religion Camp, History Camp, and the entire Camp universe, you're getting a crazy deal. If you use the code CAMP, C-A-M-P, when you check out, you're going to get 40% off your entire order at GLD.com. That's 40% off your whole order with the code CAMP at checkout at GLD.com. And after you purchase, they're going to ask where you heard about GLD. Tell them you heard about them from, you know, the good folks here at the campsite. Mark and Christos sent you. And whenever you do that, it really helps, you know, support the show. And thank you so much to GLD, and thank you to you for tuning in. What's up, guys? We're going to take a break real quick because I got to tell you something kind of embarrassing, all right? I've been working out pretty consistently for a while. I love working out. I think it's super important, part of my daily routine. And I don't really eat garbage, and I'm doing all the stuff you're supposed to do, and I got in pretty good shape. But at some point, I noticed the results kind of just stopped like matching my effort, kind of around the time that I had a kid. You know, I'd put in like the same amount of work, but like I wasn't getting the same results at the gym. I would get like, you know, a little bit more belly fat. My energy was kind of inconsistent. Recovery was taking a little bit longer. And I assumed like I was just getting older, which makes sense, right? You know, guys, when they hit their 30s, testosterone not like naturally goes down. And, you know, when that happens, your body literally starts storing more fat and you start losing muscle faster. But here's the thing that messed me up. The more body fat you carry, the more your body actually converts testosterone into estrogen, which makes it even easier to gain this fat. And it's a cycle that keeps on going around. And so I started taking Mars Men. And honestly, I've been on it for a while and I've actually noticed a difference. This is going to sound crazy. This is real. 2024, I did blood work. My testosterone was like fine. It was like on the little lower side of normal. And I did blood work recently, completely unrelated to this. And I've been taking Mars Men for, I don't know, maybe like 4 or 5 months. My testosterone went up. Now, I don't know if it's from Mars Men. I'm not going to say it's only them. You know, maybe I've been eating a little cleaner. I've been sleeping better. Who knows? But my testosterone actually got an increase. I mean, I couldn't believe it. My energy feels steadier throughout the day. My workouts have been better. And going into summer, I'm actually like leaning out in a way that I feel better about. Now, Mars Men is a natural supplement. I don't even have it in the studio because it's at my house. There's no synthetic hormones, no sketchy stimulants, just actual ingredients like Tongkat Ali, Shilajit, zinc, boron, and they're designed to actually support healthy testosterone levels. Now, look, you can just go buy all of these supplements yourself. You can go buy Tongkat Ali, Shilajit, but you got to make sure they're from the right place. You got to make sure they're the right quality quality, and it can get expensive to actually like parse it all together. But with Mars Men, it's just all of it in one, already done for you. It's made in the USA, it's third-party tested in every batch, and over 91% of users actually report higher energy. Now, here's the crazy thing with Mars Men. There's a 90-day money-back guarantee. 90 days, 3 months of trying it out, and if it's not for you, you get your money back. Zero risk. And for a limited time, the people who are listening to this program, you're going to get 50% off for life. I don't know how often this offer comes around. I don't know why they're doing this. 50% off for life, free shipping, and 3 free gifts at mengotomars.com. That's mengotomars.com for 50% off and 3 free gifts when you check out. It's also available on Amazon. It really worked for me. I like it. I still take it because, I like natural supplements and it makes me feel good. Now, when they ask where you heard about it, tell them the good people at Camp Gagnon sent you. It really helps the show more than you know. Now, let's get back to it. Now, the sources don't give us a clear explanation of why. And the truth might be that they didn't know why either. We can guess that some of the men didn't want to leave Italy. Some wanted to keep on raiding. The plunder had been extraordinary and, there was much more available that they could just go on as a, rebel militia and just, pillaging different towns and, taking money and living life that way. Some had been enslaved in Italy for so long that the idea of going home wasn't even a real thing because they had been perhaps enslaved since they were kids or maybe their whole lives. So the idea of going to a country that they were actually a foreigner in didn't even make that much sense. And Spartacus, whatever his personal intentions were, he was not a Roman general issuing orders from this unquestioned position of authority. He was leading a bunch of other rebels who had chosen to follow him, and it seems like they chose to go back. This was the moment that the rebel army could have just disappeared from history, but instead, they turned back and marched toward it. They went south, and Rome, receiving word of this news back in the capital, they made a decision. No more consuls, no more half measures. This rebel army needed to be squashed and forced into submission like the slaves they were. They required the most dangerous man in all of Rome. So, in the late summer of 72 BC, the Senate handed this rebel, full on like a war effort, to none other than Marcus Licinius Crassus. Now, Crassus deserves his own episode, and we'll probably do that here at the campsite. Please write that down.
I'm on it.
But for now, what you need to understand about him is this. He was the wealthiest man in the Roman world, possibly the wealthiest private individual in the entirety of the ancient world, period. He had made his fortune through real estate speculation and silver mines, and the guy had a weird thing where he knew how to profit off of catastrophe. Like, if Rome was burning, his private fire brigade would race to the burning building. And, he wouldn't start putting it out until the panicked owner agreed to sell it to Crassus at a discounted price. He owned a ton of Rome. He had even financed Julius Caesar's early career. He was a man who understood that money was power and power was money. But here's the thing that tormented Crassus. The thing that just gnawed at him underneath, everything that he had accumulated, all the wealth and riches, he didn't have military glory. You see, all of his great rivals of the time, all the most renowned and, admired men, Pompey and, Caesar, they accumulated the kind of fame that could only come from a battlefield victory. Pompey had already conquered Spain, and his reputation was legendary across Rome at the time. And Crassus, he had money and influence, and, the kind of quiet power of a man who, everyone owed debts to, but he never stood at the head of a victorious army with a crowd cheering his name. And in ancient Rome, this was a military empire. That mattered more than maybe anything else. And this campaign against the rebels was finally his chance. So Crassus took command of a new full-strength army. Approximately 8 legions, which is roughly in the range of like 40,000 soldiers, and immediately signaled that this campaign would be conducted differently than anything that had come before it. When a detachment of his forces ran from an engagement with Spartacus and his men, Crassus ordered something that had never been done in Roman memory, and this is called decimation. Now, this word decimation comes from the root decum, which means 10. So every soldier in all the units, they were placed into groups of 10, and each group drew straws, basically. They drew lots, and the loser in each group of 10 would be beaten to death, literally stoned and clubbed to death by the other 9 soldiers. It was a punishment designed not to kill the guilty specifically, but to traumatize the entire army together. Every man was forced to look at what happened to units that ran, and they all had to bear the punishment. Some innocent men were killed because of this embarrassment. And Crassus's message was very simple. He said to the soldiers, "I'm more dangerous than Spartacus. You can be afraid of Spartacus, but you are going to be more afraid of me." But here's what makes Crassus genuinely fascinating as a historical figure, right? I mean, like, put him in contrast with Spartacus, the man that he was trying to hunt. Spartacus had nothing. He had started with kitchen knives and, the clothes on his back. He was quite literally a slave, and everything he had built, the army, the reputation, the string of, Roman defeats, it all came from nothing. Now, Crassus was the opposite. He had everything. I mean, wealth, connections, political power, resources, classical education. I mean, he had everything. And he needed to turn his men against each other in order to fear and respect him. So 2 men coming from opposite ends of the Roman social hierarchy headed towards each other on a collision course. The campaign that followed was methodical and brutal. Crassus drove Spartacus south through Lucania, winning engagements, forcing the rebel army into progressively smaller and smaller territory, and just grinding them down over time. Rome wasn't being outfought in this battle. It was just being relentless. By the end of 71 BC, Spartacus and his force were cornered at the very toe of the Italian boot, at the Strait of Messina, the narrow channel of water separating Italy from Sicily. And he desperately needed to get across this body of water. Now, Sicily had its own enormous enslaved population, one that had already risen in rebellion twice in the previous centuries, the First and Second Servile Wars. If Spartacus could reach the island, he might be able to find allies. He might be able to resupply and continue the war from a much more defensible position. It was very desperate thinking. It was quite clever on Spartacus's end, but he didn't really have any other options. He found Cilician pirates. These are professional seafarers who worked the Western Mediterranean, and he basically negotiated a deal. He straight up just paid them. And according to Plutarch, they took his money and sailed away. Now, whether they were bribed by Rome or frightened off or just simply decided like the risk wasn't worth the price and, just wanted to, make some money off these desperate people, Plutarch calls it deception, but the full circumstances are still not fully known. What's certain is the outcome. Spartacus stood on the Italian coast with no boats, no passage, less money, and no way to Sicily. He even tried to build rafts, but that plan failed. The sea just was too difficult, It was the final thing, basically, his final option. And then Crassus made his move. He built a wall. You see, Crassus built extensive fortifications, a ditch and this massive wall stretching across the toe of Italy, cutting Spartacus off from the north. This is a 35-mile siege line. Now, researchers in 2024 actually announced the discovery of what they would call stone and earthwork remains. And this is found in the Dassone della Meia forest in Calabria. And they say that they're consistent with large-scale Roman military fortification. The excavation team thinks that this is a probable section of the barrier that Crassus actually built to seal the rebel army in. I mean, truly a remarkable find for a story that we don't even have, the primary sources of, to find potentially the barrier that Crassus actually built to capture Spartacus. It's pretty remarkable. Now, Rome thought that they had found the one thing that Spartacus couldn't get through. They thought, finally, we have Spartacus cornered. But, of course, they didn't realize who they were messing with, because Spartacus is him. He's that dude. And what does Spartacus do when he's got no place left to go? He broke through the wall. Yes, on a winter night, the sources suggest very harsh conditions, possibly even a snowstorm in that part of Italy in that winter, and he had his men fill sections of the ditch with earth and trees and wood and whatever else they could carry. A large portion of the rebel army punched through Crassus's sieged fortification, overwhelming the defenders at one chosen point on the line, and they were actually able to escape north. It was a remarkable achievement, and just another reminder that these were not, necessarily seasoned soldiers, but they were desperate to survive, and they knew how to be crafty. But it was not, in the end, a victory. After this point, there were two things that happened simultaneously that sealed the fate of the rebellion forever. First, Crassus had written to the Senate requesting even more reinforcements, and the Senate had responded by recalling Pompey from his campaign in Spain. And they even called in Lucullus from the east. Both were marching back towards Italy with armies. This was the political nightmare that Crassus had been dreading. Pompey was the most famous general in the Roman world. This is the man that they called the Great. If Pompey arrived with his veterans and claimed the decisive victory, Crassus would have done all of this and get none of the credit. All those legions, all that discipline, and the glory would go to someone who showed up right at the end and obviously had a much bigger name and decisively ended this thing. It's like how, like a famous actor might appear like the biggest, like in like a movie trailer or like on the cover of the movie, even though they only appear in like one scene. That's what Crassus was afraid of. So Crassus had to finish the war before Pompey's boots actually got onto Italian soil. Second issue working against Spartacus is that Spartacus's army was starting to fragment. After 2 years of battles and skirmishes and wars, 2 years of just constantly moving around, the human cost, the disagreements about purpose and direction and where we're going, we're at the Alps, we're turning back, all that stuff was pulling this coalition apart. And a large contingent of Gauls and Germans, led by Gannicus and Castus, separated from Spartacus's main force. And shortly after, they were caught and destroyed by Crassus. Now, Spartacus was now fighting his way, trying to go north again with a much smaller army, holding off Crassus's advancing legions as he was going along. And he was still winning these individual engagements, and the sources will record that. He was still very dangerous. But then, according to the historian Barry Strauss, Spartacus appears to have made a final decision. He wasn't going to escape anymore. And whether this was because of exhaustion or pride or just simply the calculation of a man who had just run out of road, Spartacus turned to face Crassus directly. In what reads across the sources as a deliberate charge toward the Roman command structure, he reportedly drove towards Crassus himself. A decapitation strike, the most desperate possible tactical gamble that you could do. You take out the commander, confuse and collapse the army, and you change the outcome in just a single massive gamble. If you succeed, you win. If it goes wrong, you're done. He killed 2 Roman centurions on his way. He was wounded in the thigh by a javelin, but he continued to fight on. The issue was that he was never going to reach Crassus. The Battle of the Siler River in Lucania in the spring of 71 BC was the end. Spartacus fell in the fighting. He was not captured. He wasn't taken prisoner. He was not crucified. Plutarch, Appian, and other sources are very clear. He died fighting at the front of his own army. And afterwards, in the chaos of thousands of men fighting and dying in the banks of the river, his body was never identified. Rome couldn't find him. They couldn't display him. They couldn't even hold up a corpse that day and be like, all right, we did it. The threat is done. The man's dead. Hierarchy and order and, hegemony within the Roman Empire has been restored. Spartacus just seemingly vanished. I mean, he was there. He was powerful. He was fighting. He was inspiring his men. And then in one battle, he was gone. And in the aftermath of that final battle, Crassus captured approximately 6,000 surviving rebels. He crucified every single one of them along the Appian Way, the great Roman highway running about 132 miles from Capua to Rome. 6,000 crosses spaced evenly along the road. Every traveler who used that highway for the months it took the bodies to decay would pass by them, one by one, for mile after mile after mile, from the city where it all started all the way to the heart of the city that it had threatened. Pompey arrived, too late for the battle, unfortunately for him, but just in time to intercept several thousand fugitives fleeing north, and he killed them and wrote to the Senate that while Crassus had defeated the slaves in pitched battle, he himself pulled out the roots of the war. Crassus received an ovation, a lesser ceremony on foot without the spectacle of a triumph, but Pompey, just as Crassus feared, got the full triumph and all the cheering crowds. Even at the moment of his greatest victory, Crassus was outshone by one of his biggest rivals, doing the exact thing that he was trying to take all along. Some problems, as it seems, can't be fixed with money. Now, At the end of the day, the truth of this is that we don't really know fully what Spartacus wanted. I mean, we know more or less what he did from those secondhand sources. We know the arc of his movement, the geography of his campaigns, the name of his lieutenants and his enemies, but the why, that actual catalyzing force, remains still somewhat uncertain more than 2,000 years later, right? Plutarch says he wanted to escape. Appian says that he wanted to march on Rome and take it for himself. Neither account actually comes from a source with, as we know, direct access to Spartacus's side of the story. There were no chroniclers in the rebel camp, just the distant voices of these Roman and Greek storytellers years later. Some have argued then, as well as now, that this was a proper social revolution, that Spartacus was trying to end slavery as an institution, trying to liberate his fellow indentured men and women himself and lead the actual march on Rome. Voltaire would later call this war the only just war in history. Karl Marx considered him one of his great heroes. But here's the thing. The historical evidence doesn't quite support all of these interpretations. As Britannica bluntly summarizes, his uprising was not an attempt at a social revolution, and none of Spartacus's documented actions suggest that he had a direct political program for Rome's entire social order. He may have just been trying to free his boys. He may have been trying to, get this army out of there. He was maybe trying to, just get himself free or something. We don't know exactly. And that's a very different view from trying to dismantle the institution of slavery itself. It's possible, maybe that was his goal, but at the same time, we don't know for certain. He wasn't theorizing about freedom. He was trying to find it. He was trying to fight for it for himself at the very least, and for the people who had chosen to follow him. And the gap between that and the symbol that Spartacus became is pretty big, and it's difficult to know truly what it is. And maybe that's the point. Maybe that's why Spartacus is such a revered historical figure 2,000 years later. Because, you take a guy with a very clearly stated political program, that's just a historical figure. But a guy whose intentions remain genuinely unresolved, a man who can be interpreted by any person that, chooses to read, what the historians have written about him, he becomes a symbol, an idea, and something that is much more powerful than, just a regular general or an emperor. 2,000 years later, people have decided what Spartacus means to them, and they're not always thinking the same thing, which maybe that's better. I mentioned Karl Marx before, and he wrote a letter in 1861 to Friedrich Engels called Spartacus, and he basically says that he's the most splendid fellow in the whole of ancient history. A great general, a noble character, a genuine representative of the ancient proletariat. And for Karl Marx, the Third Servile War was proof of a principle that he was spending his life trying to articulate, that even the most systematically oppressed people can organize and resist and threaten the established order. And to him, that meant something. And in 1914, a group of German socialist revolutionaries were trying to organize underground opposition to World War I and the German imperial government. And they started to distribute illegal pamphlets and building this secret network and literally putting their lives on the line for their politics. And they needed a name that captured what they were trying to do. And they chose the name Spartacus. The Spartacus League, also known as Spartacus Bund, was founded by Karl Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg. Their pamphlets were called Spartacus Letters, and the logic was very clear. It's very explicit. This is a man who refused against all odds, against the most powerful institution of the world, and fought back against the richest people in his society. And Luxemburg and Liebknecht were murdered by paramilitaries in January of 1919. And the League became the Communist Party of Germany, and the name lived on. Someone we've done an episode on, Toussaint Louverture, who led the Haitian Revolution and, the only fully successful slave revolt in modern history, was described by his contemporaries as a modern-day Spartacus. Sports clubs and teams across the world bear his name. The 1960 Stanley Kubrick film gave the 20th century this iconic line, "I am Spartacus," a scene that has no basis in the ancient, historical sources, but captured something so emotionally true about solidarity and collective resistance that it entered into the cultural consciousness even to this day. Every generation, in a way, finds its own Spartacus. But here's the thing. that distance is not a problem with the story. Like, what Spartacus actually wanted and the icon that Spartacus became in the hearts of the people who read about him. That is actually what the story is all about, like that gap, that ambiguity. Human beings always need figures that they can, you know, place themselves onto, these legends, these heroes that, are larger than life. And sometimes the ambiguity is helpful with that, it's able to do something that when every single detail, every wrongdoing, every nuanced little point, it actually makes it harder to map yourself. But when you're able to follow someone and apply and ascribe your own desires onto them, all of a sudden you become them and they become you. And I think the story of Spartacus as we know it is extremely tantalizing. This is a guy born into a world where he's property and he can't argue his way to freedom with some type of philosophical treaty. But you can point to what he did, and you can look at this guy, a gladiator, who stood up against the most terrifying and powerful empire in the world and fought back. And I think a lot of people can look at that and say, this guy did the unthinkable. Maybe so can I. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is an abridged story of the life and times of Spartacus. I mean, what an exciting story. I mean, the life of Spartacus is like, that gets you fired up.
He's the ultimate alpha.
Kind of, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what an absolute beast. I mean, it's crazy to think that one guy was able to lead this rebellion out of the prison, get his men, go up to a mountain, collect even more to the point that he was at 70,000 people, and then continue to just fight and fight and fight against everything that the Romans, threw at them. I mean, it gets you feeling yourself, You don't understand why Voltaire and Marx and all these guys looked at him and they were like, yeah, he did it.
It's also a classic David and Goliath story of being against Rome. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, right? I don't know. I think everyone can identify with that. And I think the ambiguity of the story actually makes it stronger. This is what I was mentioning before. You can put yourself in that situation, whether you are, like a Nat Turner, like an American slave that's rebelling, or you're Toussaint Louverture, or you are, like a communist in, 1900s Russia. It's you can look at your situation and be like, things aren't fair. The people at the top have everything. Me and most of the population have nothing, and we're going to go get it back through violence. It just is there's something human about it, dude. There's something about it that's yeah, we should get it back. Yeah. I can see why it becomes a rallying cry and why his story becomes, so symbolic of all these types of, revolutionary movements. I mean, truly fascinating. But I'm curious, is there anything you learned here, Christos? Anything that you want to share with the people?
It's just awesome that the 6,000 people had a chance to go back into chains and instead decided to follow this guy and be like, we're with him.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is, there's an old term that they used to describe France before the French Revolution, the noblesse oblige, where basically it's the obligation of the nobles to distribute their wealth and to do public works and to help the people. And when they don't, do the obligation of the nobles, when they don't fulfill the noblesse oblige, the people are going to kill them. And that's my plea to the wealthiest people in our society today. Hey, just build a monument or something. Build a cool park, and the people will look at you and be like, "Oh yeah, he's a nice guy."
It's also cool that they never found his body.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
it's almost Christ-like. He became like a martyr, and he ascended into heaven.
I feel like him in his last moments, he's like, don't let them find me. Put me somewhere. They'll never have my body. They can't say that they got me.
Well, have you heard the Spartacus is still alive theory?
To this day?
To this day. This is a theory I'm starting from now, but that he actually survived the Third Servile War.
Him and Epstein.
Exactly. He escaped, and now he's in a small island in Little St. James. No, Spartacus would never, dude. He's a freedom fighter and a patriot and an activist.
Not at all.
How dare you put that on him? I think Spartacus might have escaped, dude. It might be in Valhalla right now.
That'd be great.
And by that, I mean a small island where they put all the political refugees. Who knows? I'm curious what you guys think. If you're a historian or you're someone that's read about the life and times of Spartacus, is there anything I missed? Please drop a comment. Let me know. If you're just a fan like me that never really heard the story in all details, please let me know what you learned. I would love to hear what your thoughts are. I read all the comments, YouTube, Spotify, all that. I also have great news. If you like religious deep dives, and we talked a little about crucifixion today, which was rampant in the Roman Empire. Well, there was one famous guy that was crucified, and he also happens to be your Lord and Savior. His name is Jesus Christ. We do many episodes about him, as well as every other religion above and below the sun. And you can check that out, Religion Camp. Also, if you like modern deep dives of crazy stuff going on right now, things specifically pertaining to the mystical, the divine, the occult, the unexplained, well, that's what Camp Gagnon is for. That is where I do deep dives on all the crazy stuff going on right now. And also, I talk to people way smarter than me that sit across from me that actually educate me on what's going on in the world. And if you just rock with us here at History Camp, well, great news. We drop these episodes every single week, so make sure you subscribe. You can check out the Secret Society over at patreon.com/campgagnon. And I just want to thank you again, dude, for real, for watching this show and just supporting us and making all of our dreams come true. God bless you, and I'll see you in the future to talk about the past. Peace.